Yeah, and this Mono Black Devotion deck doesn't really stray from the formula too much. It's noteworthy that while he does have his share of Devour Flesh and Bile Blight, he also has moved to have some Ultimate Price's main deck to complement his Hero's Downfalls in reaction to the population of Red, Green, and Jund.
So the big rationale for playing Jund monsters is getting some additional removal spells to break serve in the mirror match. Additionally, you get Reaper of the Wilds, which is very good in the mirror as it's outside of Mizium Mortar's range, and also is just kind of a random power card in a lot of spots as well.
Yeah, I mean, Palakranos and Reaper of the Wilds were the two creatures that were really pushed to try to make sure that the Mizium Mortars didn't completely just take over. And now that Mizium Mortars is just so hot, we're seeing both Reaper of the Wild and Palakranos getting their day in the sun.
So Matt Owen here with a turn 2 Pack Rat. We'll see if Corbett has an answer here.
You know what my favorite thing to do when I have a Pack Rat in play is? Activate Pack Rat.
Yeah, that's the combo. As you see, Mizium Mortars take care of the rat.
Pack Rat got a little bit oppressive a few months ago, but the printing of Born of the Gods has gone a long way towards relieving that pressure. And it's not just Bile Blight. I mean, obviously Bile Blight is just huge against Pack Rat, but
also
the giving the tools to Red Green so that they have Mizium Mortars is helpful in this spot, but giving them enough tools like Courser of Krufix and Xenagos makes them a strong enough deck so that there's just more Mizium Mortars running around.
Yeah, also the blue, another thing that's softened Pack Rat a little bit in my mind is with the blue devotion list moving to white with the printing of Temple of Abandonment, of Enlightenment rather, they now have access to Detention Sphere. Pack Rat was insane in the mirror match, which now has access to Bile Blight, and insane against the blue devotion list, which now have access to Detention Sphere, and that sort of alleviated a lot of Pack Rat's power. It's still quite good, but it's not nearly as oppressive as it was a couple months ago.
Oh yeah, and it's always tricky because a second set in a block has its work cut out for it, where it has to do often more work than the previous set to try to make an impact, and with fewer cards. And Born of the Gods has actually subtly influenced the metagame in a lot of really healthy, positive ways.
So you see Corbett last turn play Domery and plus it, revealing an Elvish Mystic. Matt Owen took his opportunity to attack with Pack Rat and Mutavault, attacking Domery for 4, taking care of it, and now Palakranos from Corbett.
Man, I'm loving the standard world where people are just playing things like Palakranos. I mean, it's a fantastic card, but it's good to see 5/5s for 4 getting their day, you know?
Yeah, it's often Magic's metagames are really hostile to even something like Palakranos, so it being a card that you can actually cast is a pretty good sign of format health. As you see, Ultimate Price take care of Palakranos, Pack Rat across the red zone, Mutavault activated to pump Pack Rat, and Corbett get knocked down to 16.
Rats.
Temple of Malice from Corbett.
So what's Corbett looking for? Just more threats? Just keep playing out the big ones?
Yeah, he needs to, in my mind, he needs to keep pressuring Matt so he can't just sit on his heels and activate Pack Rat over and over again.
Well, part of this is that Matt's missing land drops, right?
Yes. But Matt's deck is full of so much removal that I think it's pretty tenuous to try to keep doing this for the entire game.
Oh yeah, plus if Matt ever gets a chance to start activating this Pack Rat, things can spiral out of control pretty quickly. I mean, that is a Nykthos, right?
Yes.
Like, Nykthos plus Pack Rat is quite the Mondo combo, since the Pack Rat tokens, unlike most tokens, actually do have a casting cost.
That interaction, unbeknownst to Mark Herberholz, actually fell him in the PTQ last week.
Oh my gosh. Mark Herberholz, for those not familiar, is a true American hero.
Yeah.
He was the probably the best player in the country a few years back, and it seems like now that he's moved back to the US, he's taken another, he's getting back into the tournament scene.
Absolutely.
Hardcore.
So Stormbreath Dragon from Corbett here. And Matt really, as you mentioned, in need of land drops, finds a swamp this turn.
Yeah, I mean, Matt needs to just keep killing these creatures and hopefully draw a little bit more land, but...
Sends the Pack Rat across after using Hero's Downfall on the Stormbreath Dragon.
And that's the thing. I mean, the black deck does have tons of different removal spells, but the Jund deck has an awful lot of monsters.
Yeah.
So you just got to keep playing them out there.
The problem here is that Corbett actually needs to draw those creatures, and now, because Matt started as Pack Rat, every draw step is a powerful threat.
Right.
Now Corbett is kind of run out of gas here. He's looking at a hand of Blood Crypt, Elvish Mystic, and Reaper of the Wilds.
Yeah, I mean, he was really hoping to draw an answer to the Pack Rat, before things started getting out of hand. And they haven't really spiraled out of control yet, but he's starting to get to the point where, I mean, his hand has a land, an Elvish Mystic. This is his last big threat, and it's not enough to just beat an army of pack rats by itself.
Especially with Matt at still a very comfortable life total.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Gray hasn't been able to put any pressure on him at all this game.
So there's Reaper from Corbett.
Yeah, but I don't think Matt fears the Reaper here.
And there is Life Pain Zombie from Matt. He knows that the last card in hand is Elvish Mystic from the previous Domri. And sends the turn back.
Yep, it's always quite the challenge when you have to decide between Pack Rat or any other threat. This time, Matt decides to go with Pack Rat, or goes with Life Bane Zombie.
So Corbett getting aggressive here, firing up his Mutavault and sending that and Reaper. And Matt simply trades Pack Rat with Mutavault. This implies a very powerful hand.
Wow, yeah. That's pretty intense. I mean, he's got the Life Bane Zombie for a clock, but he's saying his cards are all so good, he doesn't even need Pack Rat.
Right. It's also potentially a hedge against Mizzy Mortars. That's a card he has to be worried about going too far down the Pack Rat road.
Definitely.
So Corbett going to resolve his scry triggers here from the Reaper. But that is a very bold declaration of how good Matt's hand is right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's no lightning bolt to the face when they're at 17, but it's definitely a show of strength.
So Corbett simply plays the Blood Crypt he drew and passes the turn back.
Another land. That's what Matt was hoping to see. Now, I mean, obviously he'd love a Devour Flesh just so that he can stop Gray's only counterplay. But what does he have to do in order to gain a real board position here?
Well, I think at this point, as we see Underworld connections, I have to feel like Matt is starting to play towards a Gray Merchant. And that gives him a lot of cushion to play with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just get a few more cards. I mean, the two of them have both just been bashing mostly one for one their cards into each other. Now we're kind of at a spot where Matt has a couple more cards to work with in his hand. He's got Underworld Connections and a Life Bane Zombie, but Gray has two important things going for him. He has the Reaper, and he's got Matt at a relatively low life total. After this Reaper hits, knocking Matt to 8.
And this is Flesh Blood off the top.
Wow.
Which is a huge draw for Corbett.
That's real big. That is real big. I mean, when he can put when he can use Palokranos as flesh, I mean, that's a potentially game-winning play right there, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's in the Mutavault complicates matters.
Definitely.
As Matt does have access to a blocker, but that's of all the draws in Corbett's deck, this has to be among the best.
Well, no, I mean, so one possible line is just attack with the Reaper. If Matt takes it, then you can Flesh Blood him. Kicked. But he decides to exile. Is that just the Stormbreath Dragon?
Yeah, I think that Corbett appears to be committed to leaving up hexproof mana to protect his Reaper. So we see a chump block by Mutavault here by Matt. Corbett had access to way more aggressive plays, but I think he's committed to trying to preserve his guy.
It's definitely challenging right here. You got to decide, like, how much do you want to play around Devour Flesh versus how much do you just go for the win that turn? Attack with the Reaper by itself, and then potentially Flesh Blood him all the way with Kicker. You know, both halves.
Life Bane Zombie comes across for 3. And another Life Bane Zombie.
AKA the chump blocker.
Corbett draws a land. Here's a chump block, and you'll see a scry here from Corbett off the Reaper. Yeah, Matt seems, to me, feels like he's trying to set up a damage race and win with Gray Merchant sort of game plan right now. At least that's the vibe I'm getting. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Matt knows his back's against the wall in terms of pressure, but at least he's got a clock on Gray, and he's drawing a couple cards a turn. The life loss isn't even really that big of a deal because Gray is hitting in such big chunks anyway. Matt just needs to continue to put down blockers and continue to dig for a Gray Merchant.
Swamp for Matt.
Because remember, if he attacks Gray down to 8 here, the Gray Merchant is potentially, puts Gray on a 1-turn clock and provides Matt with yet another blocker and a comfortable enough life cushion that there aren't any real top decks that just devastate him.
And you do see it. And here's a Gray Merchant of Asphodel, drained for 6.
Yeah, just like you said.
Now we'll see if Matt also puts his Lightbane Zombie into the red zone, and he does. Dreadbore the draw for Corbett. Reaper coming across. We'll see if Matt is going to chump block or...
Now he's hoping that Matt will block with his Gray Merchant so that he can Dreadbore the Lifebane Zombie and at least beat the board.
Yeah. Matt shuffling through Corbett's graveyard here, trying to get a sense of what Corbett's played, what...
He packs his cards in.
Yep. If he has to be worried about another Flesh Blood, but I believe Matt just said no blocks and we're on to game 2. So moving on to the sideboard here, Corbett with 3 copies of Ultimate Price, 2 Abrupt Decays, 2 Dreadbores, 2 Museum Mortars, 3 Golgari Charms, a Rurik Thar, and 2 copies of Sire of Insanity.
One of the big advantages of these Jund decks is their ability to tune themselves after sideboarding in terms of which removal they're using. Standard is a format with a bunch of decent removal, but each removal spell has some weakness to it. And then after sideboarding, you can switch to the removal spells that are actually appropriate. Like for instance, here, having access to Ultimate Price gives you ways to deal with Desecration Demon, Pack Rat, and so on. Whereas you're not going to value quite as highly. Some of the other options, like in this spot, like Flesh and Blood. It's interesting because it isn't super good as a removal spell here. That game, it looked fine.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we see less Flesh and Bloods for the next game.
Very hard to play that card against a deck with a lot of instant speed removal. There's a lot of opportunity for
things can just go wrong.
Yeah.
You don't want to water your deck down too much with too much reaction. You got to stay proactive. You got to stay putting pressure on them, because if you just sit around, eventually they draw cards with their Underworld connections and gain an advantage that way.
Yeah. And Matt with our Mono Black Devotion list, looking at 2 copies of Drown in Sorrow, 2 Doom Blades, a Devour Flesh, 3 Dark Betrayals, a Bile Blight, 2 Erebos, God of the Dead, 3 Duress, and Pithing Needle. I like bringing in the additional removal spells against the 4 and 5 mana creature deck.
Oh yeah, I mean, Standard very much right now is a format where over 50% of right around 50% of sideboarding is all about getting the right removal spells, the right interaction for your opponent. Here, the removal is it extends even beyond just creature removal with things like Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle is historically very good against these red-green decks because it for sure hits Domri Rod, and you don't know for sure when they have Xenagos, the Reveler, when they have even Garruk. And at the very least, sometimes it's a backup plan against things like Palakranos or Mutavault if times get really tough.
Stormbreath Dragon and Reaper of the Wilds, too, are both reasonable Pithing Needle targets.
Yeah, sometimes you got to hit the Reaper just to be able to answer it. But the big thing is having more answers to Domri Rod, because that's one of the ways that things can really get out of control quickly. If you don't play, like the black deck doesn't always have early creatures, and an early Domri Rod can just run away with things.
Yeah, Domri to me is in terms of raw power, is the card that rationalizes these kind of decks. I think for as good as Palakranos and Stormbreath Dragon are, I don't think that you would see decks that were just built around just trying to cast those things and win the game that way. If there wasn't Domri there to provide a source of card advantage, to provide you with some amount of board control in concert with your large creatures, and to provide you with an ultimate where if it goes unchecked is basically game over.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Standard is very much a format with an uneven distribution of power level. Everybody's got their heavy hitters, everybody's got their home run cards, but it's Domri Rod and Kranos and Stormbreath Dragon that really do the heavy lifting for these decks, with Domre for sure headlining that little crew.
Yeah.
You know, like obviously Esper, Sphinx's Revelation gets a lot of credit. It couldn't be doing it if it were not for Supreme Verdict and Jace doing heavy lifting as well, you know, in Detention Sphere. But it's definitely Sphinx's Revelation that is the top billing. And for these red-green decks, Domre is the all-star.
Yeah.
Now the black decks, it's interesting because a lot of their best cards don't get credit as much as for being standalone. I mean, the black deck is much more of an ensemble performance. It's much more of a team game. With, I mean, Thoughtseize obviously gets a lot of credit, but at the end of the day, Thoughtseize usually doesn't do much more than take a single card.
Yeah, I think to me that the all-stars of the deck are Thoughtseize and Mutavault. Now, a lot of decks could theoretically play Thoughtseize and Mutavault. I think this deck incorporates them better than others.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people use Mutavault just because you kind of have to. The black deck, though, thrives on it. It is exactly what they want. It makes their pack rats better. It gives them additional threats when they're a little bit light compared to what they'd like. It can add up to a little bit of extra damage so the Gray Merchants have a bigger impact. It's a way to play a lot of land but not get flooded as easily.
Yeah, I was about to talk about that. That to me is the big one, because the deck needs to be making a lot of its early land drops, but it still needs to be, it still ultimately is trading 1 for 1. Yep. And so a card that's both a land and a spell is so powerful in that sort of game plan.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that, you know, someday, hundreds and hundreds of years from now, when the archaeologists are digging up our ruins, they're going to say this was an era dominated by Mutavault.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of other little you know, you can look at the writings on the walls and see the little stories about hunting buffalo and Thoughtseize and Sphinx's Revelation, but at the end of the day, the format is, I mean, a good 80% of people, 90% of people are playing Mutavault in some capacity.
And even though Mutavault is in all of these decks, not every deck facilitates it the same way.
Oh, it's very
really,
differently.
It's really easy to say, like, yeah, of course, everyone plays Mutavault because they're just, you know, why not? And if nothing else, they can trade with opposing Mutavaults, and that's not really, in my mind, what's going on at all. Different decks incorporate it at much different rates, and part of the reason that I think Mono Blue Devotion and Mono Black Devotion have been so prevalent is they're both very good Mutavault decks.
Absolutely.
They use Mutavault much more effectively than, say, Mono Red Aggro, you know, and that's, I think, a big part of where their power level comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just that they're monocolor decks, which are already inherently going to make better use of Mutavault than the multicolor ones. It's also that they have synergies, like Master of Waves and Pack Rat, that reward the Mutavault's actual, you know, his changeling ability. Not to mention that they both put real pressure on people, and they both have uses for the colorless mana, particularly Black. And I think Black does use it the best, because they have so many cards in their deck that need colorless in their casting cost. Blue does to a fair degree, but they do run into a trouble sometimes with things like Nightveil Spectre.
Frostburn Weird, and yeah,
Frostburn Weird, Tiebinder Mage, whereas the black deck, it's just all gravy. It's just the best card.
Especially now that they've removed Nightveil Spectre from the deck largely for Lifebane Zombie.
Exactly.
That was the last opportunity cost that Mutavault really represented, and now it's no longer a thing. So you see Corbett here has kept 7, Matt resolving his mulligan to 6, and does not look thrilled about this, but he keeps. And Corbett leads off with a basic forest and an Elvish Mystic.
Elvish Mystic is just such a great play for these red-green decks. It's funny, they really value the acceleration, but they just don't have access to very much. There just isn't very much in the format, so every time you draw your only 1-drop accelerator, it's a big deal.
So we see a turn 1 Duress for Matt here. Reveal a hand of ultimate price, which he takes. Overgrown Tomb, Courser Crewfix, Reaper of the Wilds, and Polychronos.
Duress is an interesting one against these red-green decks. It's so easy to be like, oh, well, I don't want to Duress somebody when they're going to have like Polychronos and Reaper. But you really do want to hit Domre. And once they add black to their deck, the odds that they have more removal in their deck go up, you know?
So you see a turn 2 Courser from Corbett here. Reveal another Courser.
This is actually a real good draw against the black decks because they're relying pretty heavily on Bile-Blight, but also the card advantage means a lot because they're trying to play an attrition-y game.
Yeah, every extra card you draw against Mono Black Devotion feels really impactful. Even something as innocuous as Divination feels like it's a big part of beating those kind of decks.
Divination is just awesome against black. They're so 1-for-1 based. If you can draw any cards to get out of it, particularly cheap card draw, because things like Sphinx's Revelation are slow enough that the black deck will hang out and try to hit you with like a Thoughtseize or a Duress. Whereas if you could sneak your card drawer down early.
All right, so Matt's going to go for it here. He knows there's no land in Matt's hand. He kills the Elvish Mystic, but if there's a land on top here for Corbett, and it's just Palakranos. And now Corbett with no third land drop and none on the top of his deck here.
That's kind of an exciting gamble here. I mean, you see that if you just kill the Courser, another one will come down. But maybe if you kill the Elvish Mystic, Gray might end up a little bit light on mana.
So here's Lifebane Zombie. Yeah, I like the gamble for Matt, and it definitely paid off there. Sees that Domri has been drawn, so he's looking at Courser and Palakranos and Reaper.
The second Courser, not nearly as effective as the first, since you can't play any additional lands. However, it is the only spell Gray could cast if he drew one more land. That said, obviously Palakranos and Reaper are much bigger threats.
So Matt goes ahead and takes the Palakranos, and this is really an interesting case study. People often, I think, underestimate the value of information, but it's really allowed Matt to sculpt his whole game here. The Duress and the Lifebane Zombie are working with, and the removal spell being used on the Elvish Mystic. It's really, the information is allowing him to sculpt this game.
Yeah, and it's funny because even though the math is pretty clear, this is very much the Goblin Guide experience, where sometimes it feels like, it's like, oh, wait, no.
So, a fourth land here for Matt. And plays Erebos, Scout of the Dead.
This is a pretty big move of aggression. I mean, obviously he could draw some extra cards, but what this is really saying is next turn he's going to Gray Merchant, and it's going to be almost Gray's entire life. You know, this is I'm going to attack you with Erebos is what this is saying.
So Temple of Abandon off the top for Corbett, which he does get to play. Now that scry actually has to be revealed the whole way through because of Courser's ability. So Matt gets to see this decision as well. Shows it's a stomping ground. But between the Duress and Lifebane Zombie and Corbett's Courser, Matt has just been working with just great information the whole game.
Oh yeah. I mean, he knows everything Gray has and everything he's got coming. That's a powerful combination.
So Corbett decides to leave the stomping ground on top and simply passes the turn with nothing castable in hand. Pithing Needle coming down for Matt. I assume this will name Domri. Again, he's aware that it is in Corbett's hand, so.
Yeah, you know, why not just protect your Lifebane Zombie from getting fought by the Courser?
Yep, and now we have an Underworld Connections on a Swamp. This turns on Erebos.
Turns me on too. That's a beating right there.
This also does shut off the Courser life gain, which is greater than 0 value here.
Oh, definitely. Like in the spot right here, I mean, this accelerates the clock by a full turn.
Yep. So Corbett draws the stomping ground, reveals another worthless Domri now, locked out by a Pithing Needle on the top of his deck.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he doesn't have the tools in hand, and he doesn't have the tools coming next turn. Even though he chumps, this game is locked. He's locked out. You know, I mean, what's the best thing he can play here? Like a Palakranos or a Reaper?
Yeah, and that requires him to play a stomping ground untapped here.
So if he plays Palakranos, at least he's threatening to shoot the Lifebane Zombie and to grow large enough that he can block Erebos and not die. I think that's his only line, right? Yeah. And then he has to just chump both. He has to chump this turn with the Courser and chump next turn with the Palakranos. Or not even chump, just block and bounce and shoot the Lifebane Zombie and just hope Matt has stone nothing and draws nothing from his connections.
Or Erebos too. I mean, Matt has access to a lot of cards.
Yeah. I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
That is the thing about having to do it.
So Corbett does finally play the stomping ground untapped, falling to 5. It's possible he wants to play Reaper here to give him a blocker capable of getting in front of Lifebane Zombie. Well, the risk with playing Palakranos here is that Lifebane Zombie gets to go across uncontested.
Yeah, and the other advantage to Reaper is that when the Courser chumps, he can scry that down ray to the bottom.
Yeah.
And he does play the Reaper.
So I like this a little bit better than Palacranos, but Corbett's still in a world of trouble here. Also, keep in mind that Matt does have a Mutavault in play, which is another potential attacker. I really like the game that Matt has sculpted here. He took that risk with that ultimate price, but he really had a game plan he was trying to engineer once he had all the information.
Absolutely, and it's looking like it's an investment that really did pay off.
And we see a sideboarded Dark Betrayal on Reaper of the Wilds.
That is aggressive to board in Dark Betrayal against the red-green deck.
And now I believe we have a lethal attack on board if Matt turns on his Mutavault.
That is pretty awesome. That's just like, here's what I think. You're playing red-green fatties. I'm gonna board in Duresses and Dark Betrayals. Show you some things. So it's particularly awesome since the only black creature can gain hexproof.
Yeah, it is really aggressive there, but
that's awesome.
Paid off for Matt there.
Paid off in spades.
The Dark Betrayal takes care of the Reaper, and Owen wins 2 games to 0 pretty quickly over Corbett Gray playing Jund Monsters. Matt now 2-0.
What a beating.
Some really aggressive. I like it.
That's grimy sideboarding.
Yeah.
That's the kind of sideboarding we saw the look on Gray's face where he raises his eyebrow and